Hello and welcome, everyone. Today I've got a really special episode for you. I've got two experts in their field, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the intersection between family law and schools and children and how we can help to try and make things a little bit better than sometimes they are. So I'll firstly introduce you. We have Jill Goldstein, who is the director of FMC, who's a practitioner, a researcher, and an author. She's recently published Child Inclusive Parenting Dispute Mediation, which is a fabulous little book. I will make sure we put some links so people can go and find it. And also Cheryl Lacey, who is an education advisor, creator of First Principles on Education, and also an author. So you might like to talk a little bit about that as well, Cheryl. So welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thanks, Joanne.
Okay. Really good place to start is, why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about family law and schools? They've got nothing to do with each other, do they?
If I could just respond quickly to that, I suppose my first response would be that family law crosses all areas that involve children, parents, extended family, and so on. So, yes, in fact, they do have an impact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Cheryl, what do you think?
Look, I totally agree with what Jill has said there, and it's a great opening question because we say school all the time. However, we're really talking about education here. And education, we know, is that whole lifelong experience. So when we're talking about children who happen to be students at school, family law certainly bridges that. However, we must remember that once they're outside that school gate and they are the child, that family law continues. And so it's really essential that we do identify family law as being part and parcel of the lives of all of us throughout our lifetime. And the impact just so happens to be at times when the child and the student are the same person and
Mhm.
the schools become involved.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sometimes in our thinking we compartmentalize, but that's not the reality for our families that we're working with. And Jill, you were going to say something, but you're also an advocate of keeping families out of court.
Yes, that's an understatement. I'm a passionate advocate of keeping families out of court, which means also known as a passionate advocate of keeping the state away from families. And when I say that, I'm just thinking of what Cheryl said, which I completely agree with, that we are all impacted, and rightly so, by law all the time, or we'd all be
Mm.
driving the wrong way up roads and smashing into shops or whatever. But the distinction really is the extent to which the law intrudes on our lives and on the sanctity of our lives and on families. And my particular interest is families and is also very much about the sanctity of children's well-being.
Yeah, and look, we're all mediators of one form or another. Jill, you're in New Zealand, we're in Australia, but it's something I always say when we're talking about family law, sometimes people have committed crimes, but that's not what the family court's looking at. We're talking about people's children and people's things. Sometimes it does become overly legalized and lose sight of the reality.
Joanne, I love that you said that because I think it's such a key point. The bottom line is it's not a crime. And let's just look at the fact that if a family separates, it's not a crime.
Mm.
Many ways, the way that the response has been constructed, if there's a dispute, which, we all know there often is at the time of separation, then it almost becomes a crime and it is almost treated as a crime, and children get caught between people who they used to love and trust and still do actually, but one person sees the other person as a criminal, and that's a dreadful place to put a child.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned the state, and some of the organisations that the state creates can fall into the trap of doing that, of demonising parents. It certainly can be problematic for the family for many years. Yes. What do you think, Cheryl? Where's the middle ground?
Middle ground, that's quite interesting, isn't it? For Jill to talk about the state, that in of itself, it really does bring us back full circle to the law. And with family law, we know that we're essentially pitching one parent against the other in order for someone to win and
Mm,
someone to lose. So when we come back to law and the notion of equity, and equity has got many meanings now, but in fact, equity is really originally about the whole notion of here is a law and this law must be reasonable given the circumstance. So if we
mm,
use an example such as a very religious family and they go to church regularly and it's expected that they go to church and one of the children is sick, so mum stays home with the child, that is perfectly reasonable. It would be unreasonable to expect them to have to attend church because the church says so. And
mm,
so taking it from that to everyday situations, the reasonableness in family law is being lost by who gets to tell the best story and who gets to have the greatest influence. And that's a tragedy on all families who are directly involved, but everyone indirectly involved. And it snowballs from there because of so many people engaged and involved. And Jill was saying earlier just how painful it is, and it's not a crime, as Jill said. So the middle ground is making very clear distinctions, in my view, and determining who's responsible for what and who is capable of supporting the families in the best way in a given circumstance. So there can be many
mm.
players,
Yeah.
but not one player, such as a school being involved in all things or one lawyer being involved in all things when there is a breakdown.
Mm. That's very valid. And we'll come back to the involvement of the school in a moment. But I know, Jill, that you're a really strong advocate for someone being involved, and that's the child, but in an appropriate way. Do you want to
Yes.
share a little bit more about your thoughts or philosophy on
Yeah,
that?
yes, I am. I have to make the very primary and important distinction that when I talk about child participation, as I do in my book, I'm not talking about what is often referred to as the voice of the child, which is pretty much a legal construct.
Yeah.
So child participation is about having access to the way a child is feeling, not what a child is deciding they want. And accessing the way a child is feeling can have an extremely positive impact on supporting the parents
Yeah.
to make joint consensual decisions about child they both love, but about whose well-being and arrangements they may be absolutely at loggerheads. And we all know that at times of crisis like family separation, a lot of less than rational behavior gets played out, and children do not have much power in this. So to work child inclusively with child participation really helps the parents to understand what's happening for the child they both love.
Mm. Yeah.
Can I just add a very quick rejoinder to that? I don't see children with the parents at the same time. That's really important.
There's various models around that, but yeah, giving the children a chance just to be with someone about what's going on. And it's a really important point because sometimes parents think that involving the children, child inclusive practice, that sort of thing is going to mean that they're forced to make adult decisions or having to pick a side. And I think that'd be the furthest from what we'd be wanting to try and do.
And Joanne, that is actually what happens in court
Mm.
because due weight is given to the child's wishes. And of course, that leaves the child very vulnerable to coaching from the more powerful parent.
Yeah.
I make the immediate disclaimer, which I know you understand, that I'm not talking about situations of violence and abuse and situations where a child is terrified or etc. etc. I'm talking
Mm.
about the vast majority
Yeah.
of families where there was no crime other than the fact that they couldn't make it through life together anymore and let's not call that a crime or construct it as such.
Yeah, absolutely. But the challenge as well is that we know from conflict theory and experience is that when people do get into conflict, their emotions get heightened, their perceptions get skewed. And so there's a whole lot of dysfunction that's created. It's a little bit like a fire that creates its own wind. It's not necessarily inherently in the situation, but yeah, there's all sorts of challenges that arise.
And Joanne, you're absolutely right about that. The entire support system is predicated
Mm.
on conflict. That's the irony of all of this, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Because as soon as they get to court, they write the affidavits where, the process is to minimize anything that you might have done, slant as much as possible, anything the other way. And people become I've seen a number of people become so distressed by reading those documents that the lawyers produce, you know, thinking that they're doing the best thing for their clients.
And of course, one of the things I'm conscious of all the time is that the child belongs to the family, but the child also has another whole life in the school situation.
Mm,
Where I get extremely concerned is where parents I talk to understand guardianship law, which is parents have the right to be involved
mm,
in
yeah.
education, health, well-being, religion. But schools take it on themselves to play
Mm,
a role of what they presume is the state. And I've had many parents who pretty much told me that they've been ordered off the premises when they've tried to go to an open day or a field trip, a
yeah.
soccer match. And I'm sure, Cheryl, you can comment on this, but it drives me crazy because it's like one province that the child
Mm,
can be taken and it's violated. Like
mm.
people don't even understand what the parameters of their role because they haven't been trained about it or they've chosen not to understand it. They have a particular gender bias, whatever.
Absolutely. I was just going to ask you about that, Cheryl, because I know that's a real area of focus. And we're the same in Australia. Parents have shared parental responsibility. There have been some recent changes in family law, but they didn't take away shared parental responsibility unless it's taken away. Yeah, each have a role. So, what are your thoughts about that issue of schools picking a side completely apart from any right or justification for doing that, Cheryl?
Look, it's really quite simple. At the same time, it's very complex. The
Mm,
assumptions that have been made about those who work in schools and the expectation that they're able to cope with or should be able to deal with anything and all things related to
mm.
children is what's evolved over some time.
Yeah.
And so that's a matter of state control and legislation, certainly, but it's also relinquishment generally. And that often is not deliberate. It's the stresses of life and also the blind faith that
Mm,
we're in the role of an educator. So if we put all that together and have a level playing field and just look at it from the context of a child having difficulty during a very stressful time in the life of the family, then
mm,
when they enter the school ground, my understanding and my firm view is that once they're inside that school gate, they are the student. And
mm,
I talk very much fundamentally about the distinction between child and student. They are not synonymous. And I say that because if there is one safe place for a child to be and be treated equally and be able to focus on themselves for a period of time without distraction, that one place can be
mm,
school, where they're with their peers, where they're with adults who understand that, and they can leave that baggage of pain at the gate and pick it up at the end of the day. So to bring these family issues into the school ground is really horrific.
mm,
I'll use that term, it's dreadful. Because if we flip it and said a teacher is going through a terrible divorce and they're having a difficult time, do all parents of the children who that teacher is teaching have the right to know what's going on? And you would have the unions in the government jumping up and down saying, how dare you? This is a privacy issue. And more.
Yeah.
Good point. Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's really critical. If we're talking about the role of a family, we have to remember that educators have families as well. And if we have an expectation that they are treated a particular way, so be it with the others. And if I could just make one more point, there are many philosophies that schools encounter, people in, how they teach, what they teach, so
Yeah.
on and so forth, how rules are made. And there are two very distinct ones that have been around for some time. One of them is what's known as triangulation, and that term is used in many fields. In the school settings, triangulation is actually looking at three forms of assessment, assessing curriculum area or something else. Teachers know that triangulation is a tool. It's not difficult to transfer that tool across to the family situation and say, okay, we've got mum, dad, and the child. So therefore, understanding and respecting that triangle of that family unit is my responsibility as an educator, not to pick sides and not to treat the child differently. So that's the first one. The second one is what is known as the zone of proximal development, which was developed by a philosopher by the name of Vygotsky. And that's around taking children from where they are to where they're ready to go next with support. And it's exactly what Jill's talking about when she talks about child inclusion and not them having that voice where they get to say everything that they get to say. In schools, we talk very much about children choosing their learning. That choosing their learning needs to come from where they're in a secure foundation to the next level, whether we agree with Vygotsky or not. Schools know that from a curriculum perspective. So again, it's not difficult to apply that to family situations. And I'll get on to disengagement and things like that in a moment, but I hope that answers a little bit of what you're asking.
Yeah, it's very interesting in that distinction between the child and the student. However, we've talked about the benefits of separating what's happening outside, but there's situations where it does come to the school. So if there's a family violence order, they'll often include the school to try and prevent incidents are coming to the school. But I've seen many situations where the school or the teachers will treat parent as if there was an order preventing them. So how do schools educate? How do the people in the schools? Because it's not the school, it's the humans. It's poor old buildings just sitting there doing its thing. How do we professionals educate the teachers in this area that they don't want to be involved, but they get drawn into?
That's right, Jo. And you make another good point. There's a distinction between schools and schooling and education, and schools are literally just buildings, and many people come in and out of those buildings. And this is where leaders in schools can have a tremendous impact on this. Comes back to what I was going to say about disengagement. When children are disengaged, or students in schools are disengaged, a trigger there's something not quite right. There must be a point at which the teachers should be able to say, I've noticed a behaviour that's different. Immediately at that point, that's where, in order for that teacher to keep the child who is that student, functioning in a healthy way, I'd like to see us at that point incorporate other professionals who come into that school where necessary. It could be something as minor as, I want to say minor, the cats run away, or it could be something horrific like a family violence situation. We can't make assumptions, but at the same time, we don't necessarily have the right to be privy to all of the facts, nor the gossip. And really critical there. You mentioned court papers and so forth. If the school's responsibility is to act on what they receive, not what they think or what they feel or the best story they hear or the nicest behaviour they observe. There are facts that have to be dealt with, and if there is a court order, then clearly that notification must be followed up. However, that does not mean the details of that need to be shared. The leader of the school may well be aware, but it's not to say that all the staff in the staff room get to hear about it, which can occur, which is...
Yeah. Oh, did you hear about? Absolutely. So privacy and respecting those boundaries is something that if we do have any teachers listening, It's a good reminder that this isn't something for chit chat and gossip and did you hear about.
And
And
the thing too, Joe, is just on how do we deal with it from an educational perspective.
mm,
There are so many complexities and within family law and with family breakdown. And Jill and I met each
mm,
other through studying parental alienation, for example. And if you can imagine a training course where a professional comes in and says, this is parental alienation and this is what you have to look for. Next professional comes in and offers their course and says, there's no such thing as parental alienation, it's all garbage. What did the teachers do then?
yeah.
They shouldn't have to be in a position where they have to decide one way or the other. So we have to be very careful about the education we offer, that we're not creating further conflict or confusion for them to deal with.
Absolutely. And Jill,
I'm agreeing with everything you're saying, Cheryl, and I think the way one might develop and roll out trainings is of critical importance. I just wanted to back up a little bit and say that in all of this, I do know that one of the most common reactions, grief reaction, whatever you want to call it, that children experience is they don't want to talk about their situation.
yeah.
That's why, in actual fact, and I digress briefly but consciously, it's why I work as I do, because I'm not only a mediator, but I'm also the person who talks to the child, because children don't like meeting and discussing family business with people they don't know. But the difference is I do know their family business because before I meet them, they've had a mum and dad say, we both want you to go and have a talk to her. And when I see the children, I can say, I've met your mum and dad. I really like both of them. I understand there are some in the moment, and I'm so glad you've come to talk to me. So just going back to the point I was making, and that is that basically children want to stay private. And a lot of children say, I say my dad's on business, or my mum's gone to see her folks in America. We've got absolutely no right to have that doubly exposed in their own private school environment, the
Yeah.
privacy of their school environment. Say they want to be like other children, and they are like other children. It's just
Yeah.
society's construct is
Mm.
creating a difference, which simply adds to their
Yeah.
stress and both outrageous and sadness, basically.
Absolutely, because there will be things that they're worried and upset about, and if people are asking questions, they might be worried they're going to cry, and then it'll be embarrassing, and the other kids will know. So there's a whole lot of reasons for what you're both saying from a point of view of those that are working with students to just be really mindful of that. I suppose the other end of the spectrum, though, is if students approach them seeking help. Do you have any insights about that sort of situation?
I think Cheryl was touching on the importance of an appropriate and
Mm.
careful referral. And I think
Yeah.
that's almost worthy of another hour's discussion, how that's done, what sort of referral it would be. The parents would have to both agree on a referral. So it's a big question. And I'm no advocate of leaving a child distressed and saying, we're allowed to talk to you about your distress this morning. So it's just finding a sensible line.
Yeah.
And the training could be constructed that would
Mm.
cover off those and use case studies.
Yeah.
It's looking for the ostensibly impossible situations and finding the solutions that first do no harm, basically.
Absolutely. And Cheryl, I saw you had something you were going to say as well.
Just agreeing with Jill in terms of the training, and if we're going to educate other professionals around this issue, and there are many professionals that obviously would be involved in this, it does come back to what was first said there, and that is a child in distress. The first point is to make sure that child is not distressed. And as Jill was saying, they usually don't want to talk about it. So the whole what's wrong, what's the matter situation, tell me, is it something at home? Is it something that's happened here? These questions is not necessarily for anybody, least of all the child. So yes, there's times of distress, but that's an observation. And that in itself really does lend itself to the professionalism that teachers can ensure that they stand by, and that is, my role is to calm the child and make sure that they are
Mm.
safe.
Yeah.
And then we determine what needs to happen. I'll give a personal example. My daughter's godmother and my closest friend was on the MH17 when that went down over the Ukraine. And a very personal situation, but very public. And I couldn't get to the
Mm.
fast enough to tell the teacher to try do her best not to discuss it in the classroom, and
Mm.
to tell my daughter personally so that she didn't hear the gossip in the school. But if I was having a Barney with my partner and we just split up, the last thing I would do is go running to the teacher and say, "Hey, by the way, it's just
Mm.
punch me in the eye. Can you look out for my daughter?" So there's also the responsibility on the parents, and this is where the teaching comes in, so that as a community, if you will, there's educational opportunities for everyone to understand everyone's place in any manner of difficult situation that families experience.
Yes, I was just going to pick up Cheryl's point too, that some of this is absolutely the responsibility of parents. And I'm very aware, as we all are, that if you're going through a nasty breakup and a trauma and you get on really well with the art teacher, that person might seem like a confident, get to school that morning with your child, really distressed and so on. One of the things that I say to parents when I work in child inclusive mediation is, do you know what? We're going to have a contract in here, and that is that everything we say stays in here. It doesn't go to extended family, it doesn't go to friends, actually. You can't monitor that. And it certainly doesn't go to school. And I always say, something burning happens and it's big and it's important and it will be, write it on a piece of paper and I promise you I'll put it at the very top of the agenda for our next meeting. It will be dealt with your child. Can you try and contain it? Because it's going to make the distress that you're already worried about for your child even worse.
Yeah.
So I think it would be valuable for teachers to hear that there are ways of working with parents that are expounding the same principle.
Yeah, absolutely. Respectfully asking the parents, "Don't drag me in. I'm not one of the team that you're recruiting."
Yeah, yeah, and I think if teachers were able to find a response they were comfortable with, I'm really sorry it sounds so difficult. We've got
Mm.
policy at school. We
Mm.
just don't have these conversations. It's up on the fly, but
Yeah.
there needs to be a response
Mm.
that the teachers are comfortable with. So you wouldn't, would you, Cheryl, just be telling teachers if a parent starts talking about, just say, look, I'm not going there, whatever. It needs to be reasoned,
Yeah, we
considered.
need to have empathy
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I think you're spot on, Jill. I think in many respects we have to look at it through the lens of common sense.
mm,
So if there are so many rules that we're trying to put in place and policies that say you must or can't or should, or here's 3 catchphrases you can use, or
yeah.
oh, God help us. We're dealing with families and we're dealing with professionals in schools, and
Mm.
just that common sense that there are boundaries
Mm.
for all of us, but there are certainly bridges of support as well that need to be available for families and for educators that are dealing with difficult family circumstances. Because
Yeah.
if, particularly in areas of extreme situations, as you said earlier, Joanne, if there's a court order and you've got a very dangerous individual, then
Mm.
certainly we're not going to say to the staff, it's none of your business. But the
No.
detail, again, is not something that it's just that if you see this person on the premises, clearly it's an issue. Deal with it,
Yeah.
not all the details associated with it.
Yeah.
So very important thing.
It is a balance. We talked about training for schools, giving them the opportunity to discuss and talk through these sorts of situations so that they've thought about what they would do if that arose. Particularly with COVID, there's been a changeover in a lot of ways. There's a lot of newer teachers. There's all sorts of situations where people are probably feeling out of their depth, I guess
mm,
is what I'm saying.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And there certainly must be training. There's no two ways about it. Professional development as opposed to training. Uh,
Yeah.
Most definitely. I think the point I'm making is that with that, we can't be prepared for every situation, and that's where the common
Oh,
sense in.
no.
And
Let me just pull out my protocols and,
exactly,
oh, yes, point 27, I know what to do now.
exactly. And you make a point of graduate teachers or new people coming into the, and this again is really critical if we're going to be, and we should be introducing effective professional development for schools and school communities on this. We have to make sure it's available for all rather than, okay, we'll introduce into the pre-service training for future teachers, but we forget about all those that are already there,
Yeah.
those who've been there for a year and those that have been there for 20 years. So if it's something that's required, then in fairness and responsibly, it's reasonable that we expect everybody to participate.
Mm.
The
Ah,
beauty of training in these areas is that indisputably every participant in training is a family member.
yes.
Very deeply. So maybe there's never been any sort of blips or changes in their family lives, but you can bet your bottom dollar there hasn't their cousins, their uncles, and if not their, at least the family across the road. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
Absolutely.
we're not training people to start speaking Swahili or something. We're actually drawing from an understanding of what it means to be human who needs attachment, who needs a plan, who suffers when there is a fracture.
Yeah.
And we need to train people how to work gently with that fracture, is what I.
Yeah, that's beautifully put, to work gently with that fracture. And our definitions in Australia, the best interest of the child, one of they've moved around the priorities, and one of them is the benefit of the child to be able to have a relationship with the child's parents and other people who are significant to the child when it's safe to do. And for some children, that might be the people at school, it might be their friends. It's whatever that community of support that child's got around them. And so making that a safe place, making that somewhere where they can be a student that loves their teacher.
Joanne, you make a very good point there because and I know that we are discussing schools here and we need to be doing this. Perhaps another way to look at this is that we have a family situation, and as Jill said, there's a fracture that needs to be
Mm.
dealt with. We don't have these conversations about what do we tell the tennis coach and should we stop the tennis coach from knowing. By the way, my teenage child is a babysitter. Should we talk to the babysitter and get them to know all the gory details of our breakdown? We have this whole notion that the school employees are those that should be involved in all manner of things child. And that I come back to that child and student are not synonymous. The child and football player in the junior footy squad is not the same either. So it's having that opportunity to just be for children, which is really important in all of this.
I think part of the issue, though, is the prevalence of family violence. And a pretty standard thing is when people are working with a family violence support service, if they're doing a safety plan, they're going to bring up the school. Does the school know? And so it can become automatic thinking. And perhaps that's part of what we're challenging the people that are listening. Are we doing automatic thinking and we're not taking an individual approach to look at what is needed for this family and what is the guidance that might be able to be provided to the parents
I think
particularly?
I think that's right, Joan, and I think there's a dangerous conflation with polarization that takes place as a result of adversarial processes and an
Mm,
imputation, not an allegation, that there is violence.
yeah.
And all the time I'm dealing with parties, there hasn't been physical violence, but one party will allege vehemently that the other party is psychologically violent, which under our DVA Act is violence. And so
Mm.
then we're starting to get into really tricky territory. And
Mm.
again, we can't cover that off in this discussion, but I think it's worthy of its own.
Yeah.
It's very important. Of course, we've got to protect against violence. Spurious allegations of violence are violence. So be really careful. Understand what we're dealing with here and not use one lens to look at all family discord.
Absolutely. And it actually brings back to something I was going to raise before that you mentioned, Cheryl, about picking a side. And, where there is that coercive controlling type violence, often the controlling person is extremely nice and pleasant and appealing, and the other person is under huge psychological distress and can be quite unpleasant and difficult to deal with. And I'm sure you've seen that in your work, Jill. Again, not picking sides. If you've got a legal document that tells you that to do something as a school or anywhere else that you're interacting, follow that. If not, pick sides.
That's right. If they, it really does come down to that simple fact, doesn't it? That a child has two biological parents, and with with the opportunity that they grow up with them for life, that's wonderful. Other adults become part of their life. And unless it's clearly stated in an order, the parent is not to have any access to the child whatsoever. School employees have no right to deny anything, any information, any contact, any report cards, anything,
Yeah.
unless it's absolutely written in documentation and must be followed. And any school employee that behaves in such a way under the guise of duty of care, for example, is actually committing psychological trauma, if you will, to family members and the child. It's totally inappropriate. I don't know. I can't imagine why people would do.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it is very prevalent, very prevalent. Yeah. If that's one thing to take away, if you are involved in that sort of behaviour, it is extraordinarily harmful.
It's actually tantamount to collusion and being
Mm.
complicit.
Yeah.
Really dangerous, bordering on illegal behaviour. It escalates as taking more high ground, born of lack of information, tendency to be biased anyway.
Yeah. And although there's often things like barriers that are put up, like, oh, it's administrative, you must come to the school to prove who you are, whatever, even though the parent might live very far away. I know a recent example of that, whereas they've been a parent of the school for a long time, but now they're not living with the children. There's suddenly these bizarre rules that are created for no reason. So, yeah, it's a reminder, don't jump in there. Don't do that. And it shouldn't be that schools have only got one point of access for a family for their child. I still hear that some of those situations. So that's an opportunity to improve your processes.
It's interesting, Joe, when you talk about process, because schools, those who work in schools, have the opportunity to take from their various departments samplings of policies recommended, and they can be adapted. We're not talking black and white here. Again, we're coming common sense, and it need not necessarily be the training that we provide, the house conversations with school leaders, with their staff, and the reinforcement of that. And when that comes from a school board, parents are also representative of the community, then that's when you get the healthiest of environments.
Yeah.
So we really need to ensure that our school boards are fully abreast of these situations. And that's where the best training will be, because it filters through to the whole community. It's not just, gee, we need this training for our staff. That's usually the case. And ones that are raising the children and having to live with the consequences when things are difficult. So school board level is essentially where every school should be looking at this training.
Yeah, yes.
That's wonderful. For those that are listening, what's the best way for them to contact if they want to continue the conversation with either of you? Do you want me to share your LinkedIn profiles, or what's best for you? If you've got a website or...
For me, and I would be interested in anyone that wants to have the discussions, perhaps within some sort of forum. I'm at max in terms of the number of emails that come to me.
Yes.
These sort of forums are great. But for me, as a first point of contact, I suppose, Joanne, my website, which is thefamilymatterscentre.co.nz. And I've got one of those names that gets mixed up all the time, but my surname is Goldson, Gold, S for Sally, O, N for Nelly, Goldson. And so I suppose that's following through Google searches Or dare I even say it on the eve of my book launch, my book.
Absolutely. I think your book is a brilliant place for people who want to find out more. It's very approachable for both parents and professionals. So
Yes.
it's a really good place to start and very pretty. And what about you, Cheryl?
I'm pretty simple. Find me on LinkedIn or go to my website, which is simply CherylLacey.com. So that they're too
Makes
easy
it easy.
to find me. Have a look at Amazon, the book I put out about 18 months ago, Your Children Take the Lead on Their Education, gives some very valuable insights for parents into how schools operate and function and puts them firmly back in the centre of decision making. And certainly with family situations, it's invaluable for families there. And we just mentioned a moment ago about the school boards and so forth. One thing that's important as well that we haven't mentioned is the health of those involved, including staff in schools. If there are stressful situations that they're encountering, then that's having an impact on them and they're taking that home and it's having an impact on their families. So we need to be very clear that all of this, if anyone's wanting to reach out to Jill or myself or you, Joanne, as a mediator, that it does affect everybody, regardless of the rules or ideas or common sense we want to put in place. It's important and imperative that everybody has the right support and the right methods to manage these very difficult times for families.
And speaking of mediators, like having that network and knowing mediators that can come in, have a talk to the board. If you go to mediationinstitute.edu.au, we've got to find a mediator each panel. You can find mediators all around the country in Australia. Sorry, Jill, we'll have to find in New Zealand another way because mediators, we do this work because we want to try and help people to make these life transitions without causing so much harm to each other and definitely without the harm to their children. And another topic for another day is grandparents and
Yes.
an extended
Yes.
family as well.
Yeah.
There's so much pain caused but unnecessarily. But we will have to finish up for today. So any final last thoughts?
I just wanted to comment on the grandparent part because it was bubbling in my mind. Grandparents' Day, family at war with each other, still taking sides. What a disaster.
It is because that relationship for children can be so important, so
Absolutely.
supportive and nurturing. I say that as someone who was fortunate to live in an extended household with a grandparent. Not everyone has that luxury, but whatever relationship they can have, there's certainly value. And Cheryl, any last thoughts from you?
Yes, I'll follow on with the grandparent component and just express again that we are all members of families.
Mm.
And when we're looking at a difficult family situation for one set of families, we mustn't forget the ripple effect that it has on other families. So we're never dealing with one family in a complex family situation. We're dealing with many, and dealing with that sensitively and appropriately is really what we're aiming to achieve. So thank you for having us here to discuss it today.
It's been a pleasure. Hopefully you'll inspire some people to really think about maybe some of the things they've done without thinking too deeply, which will be a really good outcome. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode and you're probably wanting to find out more about my two guests. You can find Jill Goldson's book, The Goldson Model, Child Inclusion in Parenting Dispute Mediation, the key to keeping family separation out of court. And for Cheryl Lacey, her book is Your Children, Take the Lead on Their Education, for more insights and guidance into how the school systems work and how you can be involved and support your children. I'm Joanne Law, and this has been Mediator Musings by mediators, for mediators, and other people impacted by our work. Thank you and goodbye.